This meeting is the Board of Education and public for the purpose of conducting the school district's business is not to be considered a public community meeting. Roll call.
Mrs. DeTore. Here. Mr. Douglas.
Here.
Mr. Kwiatkowski.
Here.
Dr. Phelps.
Here.
Mr. Thorson.
Here. Pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I have a motion to approve the agenda and addendum items. So moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, roll call.
Mr. Kwiatkowski.
Yes.
Dr. Phelps.
Yes.
Mr. Thorson.
Yes.
Mrs. DeTore. Yes. Mr. Douglas.
Yes. Okay, superintendent's report.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to have Nancy. I've invited Nancy and Sean here tonight to discuss Common Core, a few other things with Common Core, and along with that, Sean, with the technology piece. And I think we'd like to update the board on the testing that's went on along with the technology components. So, those are work session items.
Excellent.
Hi.
Go
So we'll probably override and interrupt each other as we talk, but I think right now, in the midst of testing live at all 4 buildings right now, we can kind of speak a little bit more specifically to the process of the actual rollout of the testing, how it's gone, give you some, kind of real-time WestGBrd information rather than hypothetical theory of the evolution of it, and then talk to you a little bit about just where the state is and what that means for us. So my role is talking about the state. Sean gets to give you all the great news. I'm giving you the state news. So the state news is Richard Ross, has the superintendent of the state, has kind of delivered some conversation. I talked a little bit about it and very informally at our last meeting about talking about the amount of testing. So he, is kind of shifting a little bit back to center, and they're creating a committee to look at the amount of testing, and they are appointing people to that committee right now. And in our neck of the woods, Shar Shyrock, who is Bay Village's director of curriculum, is someone in our area that will represent us in talking about that, along with some parents, along with some educators, teachers in the classroom. So it's a myriad of people involved in education that will look at that. And so I can't tell you that means changes, but it would indicate that they are looking seriously at that. And so it's an ever-changing and evolution and maybe a shift back to center. And we had talked about that a little bit. It seems like that's happening. So HB7 also is further along the process. Ready to be signed. That's the bill that we had talked about a little bit before that grants safe harbor. Safe harbor in some ways and not in others. So it will grant safe harbor to students. Students that do not take tests will be granted safe harbor for any kind of district decision about holding a child back. Unless it pertains to high school graduation requirements, although there are other ways to graduate from high school that the state offers us, so it's not an all-inclusive piece of that puzzle. It's complicated. It's a myriad of pathways, so ask questions as I'm talking. And the 3rd grade reading guarantee does not go away either. So the pieces of the puzzle that it would impact are anything in between. It would not allow a district to make decisions about holding back, placement, et cetera, based on the way students perform on this group of tests in year 1. It does not grant safe harbor to school districts in terms of the report card all the way. So our performance index, which is pretty much the home run of the report card, it is the single most glaring, I think, grade that a school district would hold up, because it's literally a measure of every test that every student takes. So it's really a picture of how you're doing as a district. That will be impacted. So non-tests become zeros, and we look to have an impact. We will see an impact here on our report card. It might not drop us a letter grade because we were so high in the 80s. We were the highest B, if you can remember. We were like an 89.6 or something like that. So it might not drop us a letter grade, but it will certainly impact the number. It will not, yes, go ahead.
Can they explain why that would, it just seems, and again, that goes to the state, but I mean, it seems make no sense just thinking about it statistically. Why would you give a 0 to, it's like if 25% of your kids don't want to do it? What does the state talk about? Is that question, I imagine that question's raised.
They have they have published really more just a fact. So here are the facts. This is what's going to be impacted and this is what isn't. So the HB7 and the state really, to me, protects students, but not necessarily districts. And no, districts have a lot of questions about that, I can assure you. I mean, what will be an impact for us will be devastating to others. I can tell you that much.
Nancy,
yes, I'm
now,
sorry.
has House Bill 7 been passed or?
It's not signed yet, so it's on the desk to be signed
So-
by the governor.
Oh, okay.
So
But it's
we
been
think
voted
it's-
on and it's been accepted.
Yes.
But
It's
there's
been
no
voted
amendment.
on, it's not been signed. So the theory is it's gonna go through,
Right.
and we anticipate that those protections will be in place for students.
Yeah, but the hard part, again, the hard part about that is, why would they penalize schools? I mean, they don't penalize the student, but they
Well,
penalize the
to
school.
that question, and I don't know that this is the case, but concern has always been that districts game the system by making sure that certain students don't take the tests. And so it's probably a response to that. That would at least be the most obvious thing without knowing what it is.
That's one reason. So, it's, you know, it's interesting, obviously, and we have looked at it in terms of our report card and where we're gonna see impact and, you know, where our numbers are falling, and so we're looking at that. But it's something that we have to anticipate going into next year, and you know, we'll be talking about it as we move forward.
Do we reach out to, how many students were there?
So it is about between 3% and 4% at one of our elementary buildings. It is negligible in another elementary building. It is negligible at our high school, and it is about 5% in the middle school of the student
I'm
population.
sorry, what kind of numbers are we talking?
So you're looking at one elementary building, it's around 13. At our middle school, it is around 25.
Did we reach out to these
Yes.
parents to try to explain?
Yes, depending on timing. So some turned it in, you know, so some notified the school as testing was happening. So anyone that informed us before that we could reach out to and communicate with, individual building principals communicated with and shared very particular information, both from the state and from our district that we created in-house. So, you know, we want you to know, because we would want you to make an informed decision. These are the consequences. And I've talked to a lot of parents myself. And really, with the understanding of, we would want you to make an informed decision. I'm not sales pitching you. You know, you have a right as a parent as well, and we respect those rights, but we would want you to know the impact that it will have on the district, and it will be public because it will be on our report card too. And it also, you know, has very individualized impact on students because we want to prepare our students for high stakes testing. We live in a world of high stakes testing. Love it or hate it, you know, we want our students to be prepared for the ACT and the SAT and AP coursework, and so we have a whole myriad of lists that we want to talk to parents about, and we have reached out and done that.
So how many in the other elementary and high school?
3 at the high school in the 9th grade, and there are 13 in government. Those are seniors that will not impact the report card because that's just a state law that everybody taking government and U.S. history has to take the test. But it doesn't impact graduation and won't impact the report card. So the seniors, I don't know how you could look at that. They got smart. They were like, we're out. So that happened just recently, the day of the testing. And then in terms of the other elementary school, 3 students.
And the kids who are, my son goes to Julie Billiard, so he's here, but he's there. So does his testing go on our score? And now that he's in 8th grade, so and his math skills are probably like 5th or 6th grade level, but his test was all algebra. And he told me he just checked every box, you know, whatever box randomly, because he didn't know what X, Y, Z was. And that was the 8th grade math test. He probably got them all wrong. And he spent like 2 hours, or whatever the test was. So sitting there.
So
With an IEP, he has an
Right,
IEP,
yeah.
he's learning.
they're definitely more rigorous, so the
Right.
math standards have shifted down pretty much skill set by a year-ish. I will tell you, time on test, just so you understand, they are not a complete and utter shift. I mean, if you would look at them individually, there is more time on test depending on the test. What it really is more spread out and compartmentalized into smaller testing sittings. But actually, minutes on test isn't necessarily, depending on the test, a wide variance. So before, like for the OGT, for instance, we asked 10th grade students in the previous testing to take a reading test and a math test, and they were granted 2.5 hours each day, so about 5 hours of testing. When you break down the Park ELA at 9th grade, it's almost an identical amount of allowed time of testing. It's just done in 3 sittings in March and 2 sittings in May. And so, and in some areas, the testing minutes are more. I mean, if you would do a 1-to-1 comparison of minutes, some are more, but they are not crazily and markedly more. It's just the spread out. So it seems like tons and tons and tons of more testing.
Is that easier on kids, though, to spread it out?
Pardon me?
Is that easier on kids? What's the impact on the kids who are taking the test? The park spread out and the OGT concentrated into a couple tests that are longer.
Well, I
What's
suppose
the impact?
it depends on the student. I mean, I would tell you, you know, I have been laughing because, you know, I'm living with a 9th grader, so it's very different. I mean, he has a lot of opinions. I would have invited him here today, but I thought it best that he stayed at home, actually. But, you know, it's funny to talk to him. So, you know, I don't think there's, you know, day one, it was like, oh, it was great. Took me 25 minutes. I was like, what? Like, what do you mean? Did you check all your answers? So I think now we're in week, you know, 3, and I think he's seemingly, gosh, I mean, we're testing again. Yeah. So I think the drawn outness in their perception is it seems to be taking a long time. But in terms of, I'm not hearing a lot in terms of rigor. I'm just hearing it's, you know, more testing. And again, different districts have chosen to do it differently. You know, one of the things that we were very careful to do, and when I say we, I give no credit to actually me, that credit goes everywhere here, everywhere to Brenda Harris if she was sitting with me, but we did some very savvy things to ensure glitches that other districts are suffering. We did not suffer the same fate. We have not had huge crashes. We have not had days where testing had to be abandoned that we are hearing are happening in other districts. Ours has been, you know, and now I'm stepping on toes, but ours has been fairly seamless, but we've made very particular choices about making it spread across rather than overlapping tons and tons of testing, because we just wanted to see when it goes live, what does the bandwidth look like. Now I'm really stepping out of my comfort zone, so I'm stopping to talk about that because Sean is going to talk a little bit more about that. But so I would tell you, we have already internally talked about there are definitely areas where you can shorten the window of testing for students, because we're feeling more confident in audiences and pockets of trial and error here.
Yeah.
So I can tell you, my daughter's in 7th grade, and Paolo actually started his on Monday in 5th grade. And I'm not a big fan of park testing, and both of my kids have left me at awe because both of them say this is the easiest test I've ever taken, and it takes them a half hour. And so I'm like, you know, because again, I almost opted out, but I told them, let's take it, let's see how it is to make an accurate, decision as to, how we feel about it. And both of them think it is so much easier than the test they've ever taken.
Is there a standard, though, that kids react to in terms of the pressure and their perception of the test, of the comparison of spreading it out versus concentrating? I mean, is there like a commonly accepted standard among people who do curriculum? What is the least stressful for kids?
Well, I think frankly, Ben, people have done it with what they have of it, and what they are availed of in their districts. We are very lucky because there were some decisions made by the board to prepare ourselves with technology, which we did, which have enabled us to do things in a pretty particular way for kids. And we did that because we thought that was best for students. Other districts haven't been able to do that, frankly, and so they're doing it in various ways. I mean, some districts decided to do all paper pencil and did not do the technology this year. And we just felt like if it's gonna be the first year out of the gate, let's try to really do it the way it's intended. So I don't think there's an answer to your question, honestly.
Okay, because I don't want to get too far afield, but
Sure.
I've also read that in some districts, there's been criticism because the kids are not used to doing these tests on computers and so on. And now, our kids basically have had enough exposure to the technology, I take it, that they're comfortable doing it online.
Yes, and I would say, you know, it's funny because we're, you know, Dr. Phelps is talking about math, we're talking ELA, so I think it's different for different content as well. You know, my sweet guy was like, the math was odd for him because he's, you know, trying to do his answers, write his answers with the technology, and math is just such a scribed, you know, rote type of activity, and I think the math for him was a little bit like, gosh, this is odd. And I told him I just took the GRE, don't ask, but it was all online. I mean, the entire math portion of the GRE was online, and so I said to him, this is really kind of the way it's going. The ELA, I think, when you watch kids, you know, I've been in testing, I've been, you know, watching from the rafters just to see kid perception. They're like, do. So it's funny because I think I've had to face my own adult fear a little bit more because I think really a lot of it is adult fear and maybe not child-centered because they're so much, it's their world, they've grown up in it, and it's fairly seamless, it seems like, for them.
That's good, because, you know, like I said, there are those districts that are saying that their kids are really intimidated by taking the test, you know, on the computer and online, so this is.
But I think we heard in the last meeting, I mean, like Jackie said, her kids who are probably above average, but like the kids like my kid, my son and the girls who talked last week, you know, they take a test, they want to take a test and think they can do it, and he can't even answer one question right. So you've got those, my girl talked last time, she said, you know, I'm so stressed because I'm taking a test I was never prepared for. I don't know any of the answers. You know, my son wasn't, I don't know if he was as traumatized by it, but the girl sounded like she was. So you have these two populations, well, I mean, you have a huge diverse population, but it treats everybody the same. So we have kids who are high functioning, who, oh, it's breezy. You have other kids like, I'm stupid. I don't even know one of these. And, you know, I think that's a big thing. And they don't know that. They don't understand that why we're doing this. They kind of know, but they don't know what it means.
Right.
I can speak to what it's looked like, because I've seen what it's looked like in all 4 buildings, just from a technology standpoint. I haven't been in every single session, obviously, because I'm divided between all 4 of them, but especially with the kickoff at every building, I was at every one of those sessions. As a district, we're dealing with multiple tests. We've been dealing with PARC and TIDE, which are really 2 separate entities. They're 2 different testing engines for our students, and the MAPS testing. We've been supporting 4 different operating systems. You know, with the fact that we're using PCs, we're dealing with Windows 7 and Windows XP, plus we're dealing with the Chrome platform, and we're dealing with Apple's platform on the iPads at grade 4 and grade 3. There's 10 different apps and browsers with multiple updates that we're dealing with right now in the build-up to testing. Changes were as late as February 14th, literally on Valentine's Day. We were getting emails from PARC letting us know that yet again there's been another update. Happy Valentine's Day. Proctor caching software, which is something we were able to put in on our side in order to help support testing, so we're not always relying on the internet bandwidth. We were actually able to install computers into the buildings. That software has completely changed since last year. So we had to learn a new software and a new way to connect that to our tests at all 4 buildings. Uploads of the student data to drastically changing systems. Staff support and training and issue resolution, because our staff has been very diligent on, our teaching staff and building level principals have been very diligent on reporting any issues that have crept up during infrastructure tests. So that way we could try to front load as much as we could to make it a seamless experience when we actually went live because of the fears of the unknown. I mean, this is for everybody, brand new testing for all of us. So we were trying to resolve everything we could before testing to try to alleviate some of the fears, because that is an issue. I mean, it's something that we really need to be cognizant of. This went well because we've got a coordinator of data and testing that has been disseminating the emails and making sure that every department knows what their job is and is diligent on that. You're not giving yourself enough credit because we all have different resources that we are dealing with outside. You have your own network that you've been sending emails to all of us with things that you've been finding. We've all been doing that because we have our contacts that we've been sharing. What's it look like in your district? So that way we're learning from each other. So we haven't been doing this in isolation. We've been learning from other districts what's been going forward. We've had 4 successful buildings. The issues have been very minor. Everything I just laid out for you, the reason why I wanted to tell you all that is so you can see, wow, because of the staff that we've got here, the students that we have here, and how they're taught here, no matter where our students fall, our students are really good critical thinkers. They're adapting to these environments. It is a high stress situation. I've got to say, any students that I encountered that have had issues, you know, like reboots and things like that, just because that's what happens. We have that with paper and pencil, with breaking of pencils, you know, and things like that. Those are high stress periods when you're testing as well, because students know high stakes testing, whether they're online or offline, is a high stress area. Our kids have been incredible. Our teaching staff has been incredible. Everybody from every department who's been involved has been incredible. That's why this has been so successful. We've really had a very smooth time with this. So we really should applaud everybody in our district who had a role in this, because if it wasn't for the team effort, it would not be going that way. In isolation, this would never have worked. So everyone deserves an applause for that. We did have, Nancy mentioned the new technology, the brand new Chromebooks that we got in for the elementaries in 5th grade were rolled out in time. They had external mice, so that way students who aren't familiar with touchpads but are very familiar with the keyboard and mouse experience had that option. So, and the students who love touchpads were able to use that, so the students were able to choose what works best for them. There were no issues with those Chromebooks at all. They had flawless experience, and just across the district it's been really, it really says a lot about the quality of the people that work here and the quality of our students, the fact that we were able to get through this brand new experience where there is a lot of high stress and anxiety because it's unknown.
Sean, just so I understand, one of our elementary schools did paper and pencil.
For 3rd grade only.
For 3rd grade
so
only.
Westwood's for 4th and 5th grade was online.
And Lindsay was online for all?
3rd, 4th, and 5th. Okay.
And they were able to use either the platform of the iPads or Chromebooks?
The iPads, they use external keyboards.
We had purchased those?
Exactly.
Okay. So then when we got into middle school and high school, what were they using? Because we don't have one-to-one technology there, right?
Right.
They were pulling Chromebook carts into, and it looked different at each building. So in the case of the middle school, they were pulling Chromebook carts into the media center, and they were using a combination of that with desktops that were already in the media center. So students were testing on both platforms.
So you would leave like your class and whatever subject you were in, then you were in like a lab, so to speak?
They made that a testing station. So what they were doing is they had a schedule set up, so they were rotating students through in groups. So that way they took testing that way, and they put in different teaching staff who were became like the testing experts to help guide the students through the testing environment. So that way if students had trouble, they had extra devices there that were ready to go, so that way we tried to make sure that it was as low stress a situation as possible. Middle school actually was the one that kicked it off. And then it went from there to Lindsay and the high school, and then shortly afterwards Westwood began. That was done by design, so that way the technology support staff and Brenda could be at all of the buildings when testing kicked off, so we could be there to support them if they ran into any issues or questions. So they weren't doing it in isolation.
And just as, how did high school?
Oh, sorry.
No,
high school
okay.
is doing it in 2 ways. They have a separate lab set up that they've been rotating students through. That's like a desktop computer lab. It's normally set aside as a regular lab in the building, but they set it aside for testing purposes with all the browsers installed. They also have Chromebooks that they're going to be using for the 2nd phase of testing. So, and their schedule was set to coordinate with that.
Did you you find at any of that time that we were like lacking any technology for them? I mean, ideally it'd be great if everybody had, right? But I mean, were we lacking?
Basically, how the principals did it at their respective building, they took a look at the technology that they have, and they set their schedule up in how they were testing based on the technology. So rather than fighting against their experience, their equipment, they decided to, like, let's build one that matches the equipment we have in our buildings. So no, they were not lacking, because really the leadership decision was, let's front load this, let's make a plan for it, and they did a great job of setting up schedules that match. That's why each building was a little bit different in how they presented it. They presented it based on their technology and what made sense for their environment. So it was a really good choice to just kind of honestly look at where we're at, and I think that's why everything ran so smooth.
It's amazing. Congratulations, both of you,
Thank you.
and your staff.
Yeah,
Everybody
the whole staff really deserves a ton of credit for this.
Yes.
And I don't want to dwell on this because it is the negative. In talking to the other, this seems like an extraordinarily high number of kids who opted out of this testing. Were our sister districts experiencing?
That we are, what I am hearing, so I'm touching base for other reasons, but Aurora was about right where we were, and I was surprised actually to hear it. We have been hearing more about people that are way more, and then there are like districts that have none. So Solon has none at the high school, and she was fairly certain, the principal, that it was none everywhere. So it just depends. Well, yeah, their numbers would be, I'm certain, probably more than ours, but I don't know that for sure, so I shouldn't speak to it. But those are the two that I personally talked to. I would
Well,
think so.
I would think so too, after all of their.
Yeah, but I can finish. I mean, I just happen to be talking to Solon and Aurora, which is why I touch base with them. But I can make more phone calls if you want me to.
Just would kind of be curious, and if you jot an email,
Sure.
that'd be great. I mean, because I was thinking like 10 and 13. Hey, I'm kind of floored by the number, because that could really, I mean, we were so close to an A. I mean, 89.6 is so close to an A. And I mean, I understand it's a sweet spot for a B, and we'll probably be a B again. We were so close to being an A.
Right.
And now we're not even close.
Is there gonna be a way to still, to be able to figure out that's still?
It's gonna be difficult, and I'll tell you why. So even predicting is very difficult. So I should not say, oh, well, to be a B. I mean, I should not say that, but it depends, because when you look at the performance index, based on the test and the performance level of the test, you get additional points. So it depends. It depends on the students that aren't taking the test. It depends on where they would have fallen in terms of achievement. It depends on percentage, the percentages at each achievement level. So it's not just this, it's more complex than a singleton count mathematical equation. So it's impossible to predict. And one of the frustrating parts is you love using, you know, we're data people too, so we love to use that report card and really look at a year to year, and it will be very difficult to do that.
Well, building administrators, because I know that administrators, you know, basically get the scores for each individual kid. And I know that's something so far down the road, because we don't even get it so late in the year.
Right.
But maybe not in the state's perspective, but in their own personal knowledge.
Yes.
They will be able to take a look at that and see,
Sure.
correct?
Yes.
Individual measurements.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And then, but what is saddening is that we'll have holes for those students' data and data points, and we do use that data. I mean, you know, I taught seniors in high school for a long time, and I knew everybody's OGT score when they got to me, because for some, I was still working with them in remediation to make sure that they could graduate. And for others, it gave you a sense of the type of student you were dealing with, and at least a starting point for data. And I think one of the things that worries me is, you know, in the opting out, it's just as if it's a data point for the report card only, and it's not. I mean, we use those data points internally to grow kids, and that's why we're saddened, but we hope that we will shift back to middle. We hope that this is kind of a first year now we've seen it, and parents have had a chance to see it live, and
The damage is done though too, and I mean.
right, for the singleton area.
Well, and Mike, we evaluate teachers as well, their performance based on this, and so that's gonna be skewed.
It will be. Now, the state, it's interesting the way they do value added for teachers. So for their holes of data, they shadow in a number, they guesstimate a number, so it's not like you can take a 0 as a teacher, but.
Take a 0 as a district. It's so frustrating. There's all this compensation for everything except for the district. I'm sorry.
No, listen, it's the sentiment is everywhere. I mean, when you go to meetings of superintendents, when you go to meetings of curriculum directors, when you go to meetings of tech board, I mean, it is the same everywhere. Everybody's like, oh, okay, but when it starts, and let me tell you, for some districts, it is an enormous percentage of their populations, good districts. I mean, I've been in audiences where you're just, my heart breaks, because it's, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it will just be this kind of flash report card that, okay, and then they'll have to move on from there. So it's interesting how it's unfolding, I would say. But I will tell you that your building principals have worked really hard to communicate with parents to help people make an informed choice. And they're often very difficult dialogues and very difficult conversations. But I am really proud of them because they have reached out in an effort just to at least let people know the decision and the impact. So
I think they've steered some.
I think so.
I think they have.
Good.
And some of the conversations that I've heard is, what, they're going to give it a shot this year, or
Good.
And these numbers could be worse than what you're seeing right now.
Right.
And I think they did do a good job.
Did people have to give a reason why they were opting out? Not that I'm asking for those now.
They say yes, we require them to put it in writing. There's a misnomer that there's a form, people would come into our district, school districts don't opt out, it's not, we don't opt people out. But we just required it in writing and then a signature in writing from a parent. So we didn't, micromanage the reasons or the rationales. But they pretty much gave them in the writing.
Anything you can share?
The dramatic testing, definitely, Common Core, I mean, those were the two rationales, absolutely. I mean, we aren't seeing anything else. It's really a lot of.
So a distrust of Common Core and a concern about over-testing?
Yes.
Okay.
Those are the primary reasons, absolutely. And I can't even think of any singular incident, and we've communicated about every one opting out. I mean, I have personally communicated with building principals and kept, track. I can't think of a singular incident of anything else but those two reasons.
What are the students that weren't taking the test, what do they do during a time period?
So they're, for some, so one of the savvy things I think that building principals did, particularly at the high school and middle school level, they created these schedules where when kids finish testing, they go back to school, they go back to classes. So the way that Jay kind of set off the way he planned his schedule. He was the kind of flagship leader at the high school, and he planned this really incredible savvy schedule so that classes maintain. We are not seeing that in other districts. I'm telling you right now, mine is missing class. I mean, it is just a straight pull-out situation for all this time. So he did this, he kind of juggernauted this really interesting schedule where you finish, input, and off you go, and you're back in a learning environment. And so for some, it didn't really matter. They just didn't go to the testing sessions. For others, there were planned activities and curricular activities around it, knowing that we were providing, that we had to provide instruction and content for them.
Can you, little debate, or I don't even know if it's a rumor, but a debate that was going on was that if they were not choosing to take the test, that some felt that they didn't have to do the prep.
So, this is like the worst.
Sorry.
The highs, like thinking about it. So there is, we hear a lot about this concept of test prep, and if there's nothing that makes me crazier. There's nothing that makes me crazier than that term. First of all, we teach students an individualized WestGBrd curriculum based on state adopted standards. We take our curriculum very seriously. We think about it in terms of our student population. This is not something that somebody else slapped us with and we just are robotically getting in front of a room of people and blah, blah, blah. So the fact that anything that we're asking of students is curricular. So this image of test prep, I mean, if a teacher is giving them something that is high stakes, that is close to testing, and hey, we want you to be ready, it is curricular in nature. And so this idea that it's this kind of wacky test prep that's happening, you know, and the term just like makes me crazy, because anything that we're doing in terms of classroom environment and data collection is because of the curriculum that we're giving students. We are not doing something in isolation that is test prep. And
So like buckle down, for example, is not.
No, we would use that in other cases. I mean, when you're asking somebody to write a comparative essay, it's because the standards ask us to develop critical thinkers that can look for evidentiary-based evidence and produce it in a piece of writing. It's not to get them ready for Park. And it's because when they go to college, a college professor will ask them to do that type of work, and we want them to be ready for that type of work. And so there's this kind of mired notion of test prep that we hear, and he knows how crazy it makes me whenever I hear it. Like, if I hear somebody say test prep, I'm like, nothing you do is test prep, but everything you do is student prep. I mean, we're getting our kids ready for their next steps, whether it's college or career right out of high school. I mean, that's what our job is. So I think we hear that a lot. We hear that in terms of this new phase of standards, but that would be my response to that. I mean, I think we've heard it a little bit, and I know parents have been like, well, they don't have to do that because that's about Park. And Park is measuring standards and curriculum. And so we're still teaching the curriculum, you're still responsible for the curricular work. This has been our response. But I'm sorry.
Some of the test prep revolving around preparing them for the online component of the test are really things they're going to be using throughout their lives. Forget about the online test, you know, things like working with text editors, drag and drop. I mean, these are things that we do on a daily basis if we use technology. Working with drop-down menus, being able to pull up tools. These are all things that we all do right now with technology. So it's really showing the kids what it looks like in a particular interface. So on testing day, it's not foreign to them. But any of the kids, even if they opted out, those are skills that they're going to benefit from using them in other interfaces later, because we all know, you know, in the course of the last 5 years, how many times has an interface that you work with right now changed, and the kids are learning to adapt to different interfaces and environments.
Well, Sean, in the national media, though, we read about teachers complaining about test prep. So what do you think they're complaining about, these teachers, presumably in other systems, because our teachers haven't gotten in a lot of national media as far as I know, but I do see that complaint, and they'll always feature a teacher somewhere. And so what do you think these teachers are responding to?
I think that's where part of the change has been, though. With this test, because of the fact that we haven't had years of it, we don't have a lot of test prep to work with. So the specific skills that I was talking about, a lot of what we had to prepare the kids for, specific online skills that they've had to use for this one.
Yeah.
You know, I'm somebody who came from a third grade classroom with the OAA. We had years of material available with years of practice tests with the OAA. There aren't those with Park. There aren't those with Tide. They haven't been around long enough. There are sample problems, but any teacher will tell you part of their frustration now is that there isn't enough materials as far as what does it actually look like to apply it to everything that they're doing. So that's actually more of the frustration now is resource for them than the actual overabundance of it. So it's a different sort of problem now. You know, I think we've kind of shifted the other way, but I think that would be certainly correct.
No, I think that's a piece of it. You know, I liken it to when the OGTs came out. I mean, I can tell you that teaching seniors, I just could not even fathom that a high stakes test was going to determine whether or not a child would graduate. It was so foreign, such a foreign concept. And for someone who worked with struggling learners, I was virtually paralyzed by it. I just couldn't imagine what it could possibly be like, or good for kids, and so I think a lot of that is newness. I mean, these are rolling out. This is brand new. It's a different way of looking at it. And of course, exams in high school over multiple content areas, it's different. And I would tell you, you know, the other piece of it is we're not building widgets. I mean, when I'm going to get up, when I go on my tour, I mean, this is gonna be the title of my tour. We're not building widgets. So I might not be able to grow a child in a year's worth of time. I might have a child that is having some serious struggles, whether it be with home or with school at a certain moment in time. But I'm laying foundational work that's going to be seen in later years. But I'm gonna be measured on the performance of the child in this moment of time. And I think that's scary for teachers too, because I would tell you that I have personally seen a lot of successes on down the line that I feel like I should have probably gotten a piece of the pie, but I certainly would not in this new age. And I think that's hard for teachers because it's a different way of looking at our vocation. And it's not that I personally am anti it, because I'm a data person too. So I like to see what my numbers look like. I want to see my growth, but I just think it's really difficult for people. It's such a shift.
Well, it seems that the whole testing thing, there's, like you're saying, Sean, because it's new, that there's a dearth of background information for people to use, but hasn't traditionally, and I don't know about a WestG, because I don't recall this, but what I read about one of the things people are really bothered by about testing is students will get like practice tests beforehand, and they'll get instructions on how to take a test, choose C if you're, so it's rather than material that's geared toward learning, it's material that's geared toward test taking specifically. How to, for instance, the tests which were graded by individuals, the OGT, as I understand, they would look for keywords. And so you then teach your students to put keywords into your extended responses and so on. So I think that, and I don't know how much of that we've done at WestG. I know my kids know how to do those things, so they must have learned them somewhere. But is that what people are really talking about when they're talking about
Sure.
teaching, testing skills?
Absolutely. And I would tell you, don't call Joe Regano, but guilty as charged. Absolutely. I mean, I'm teaching students in a classroom that have to pass a test. I mean, so ethically, I have a moral responsibility to prepare them as best that they can be. I think one of the reasons that this new way of testing has gained a lot of backing is because it's much more, you cannot possibly teach somebody to take this kind of a test. I mean, it's just so much more skill-based.
Well, it sounds like what you were saying, for instance, with comparison contrast, for
Sure.
instance. You literally are testing a skill rather than a test-taking skill.
Right. I would say that's right. To me, that's the major difference between kind of the state OGT, that type of testing versus these tests. It's much more open-ended, evidentiary-based. The OGT was much more singular of purpose. It wasn't across multiple texts. It was read a text, answer a question, show 2 examples. It was much more one-to-one. These are much more higher-level thinking and thought processes.
Doing well on tests, though, that is a skill.
Right.
Think about when we all took our temp test, but to take the driving test, that's a skill. So that's something that transfers to regular everyday life. They're going to be tested in life.
Sure.
So I don't think that, the nature of spending time with young people on how to take a test is all bad.
Right. And I would tell you, I said to a WestGBrd parent on the phone who was asking if my own children were taking the test, and I was like, hey, listen, I've got a guy 2 years away from taking the ACT.
That's right.
You betcha he's taking those tests. And he is going, we're going to discuss, getting yourself ready and getting a good night's sleep, because he's going to be, with that theory behind it, he is going to have to measure against a national norm, unfortunately for us, much sooner rather than later. And so that, yeah, I would agree, that's a piece of it too.
Because test-taking anxiety is real.
Right.
There are some people that are just naturally good at it, and there are some people that struggle. So I think it's a good thing.
We've been buoyed by the process here. I think what has, like I've said before, been very problematic in other places has been an enormous success for us and for our building principals and for our staff. And we are obviously bursting with pride at their work and bursting with pride for our students. And it's a victory for you. You should be really happy with it.
I spent most of my career in testing here, so I mean, I can speak to what that looks like as far as trying to find the balance between preparing your kids properly for the test, making sure that we're getting in our core content and really strong instruction. And it is a balance, I think every teacher who deals with that struggles with finding the right mix. You know, making sure that your students are aware of terminology differences that may be between the way you're instructing and the way that it looks on the test. I'll give a math example that's very simple. Find the answer versus find the sum, find the product, find the difference. For kids can throw them off completely on what they're supposed to do. So, you know, you would do test prep revolving around that. And that may be something you're integrating into a math lesson, just to make sure the kids are aware that they know different terminology for the same thing, synonyms. You know, that's a great example of that. So those are things we do need to be cognizant of, so that way our kids perform the way that their instruction has been, so that way they can actually show what they really can do. It's a tough topic, it's a controversial topic, because for teachers, any teacher that's been in a testing year will tell you they struggle with that every day. You know, trying to make sure that you're getting in strong core instruction while at the same time making sure that you're balancing that out with preparing our kids properly.
Was there anything that we can take away from this that we didn't do well that we could improve on next year?
Yeah, that you need.
Yes, great question. I think we were talking today, so we're not quite through yet PBA. We have another about week and a half to finish out this first round. And then we'll sit back down. But today, in a long admin meeting, we just started talking about pockets here and there. Mr. Nutter just went, no. But we were talking, I think there are ways to cut down on days and have sessions one after another and make it just a little bit friendlier to students, and we would want to talk about that and doing, you know, what's best for kids, and I think that those are the conversations that we've been having and that's all we've talked about, really, just how did this round go, exactly what Jackie's talking about is what we've seen, you know, 30 minutes, kids are leaving, so if we have a 90-minute window and kids are done in 30, you know, I mean, what can we do, how much can we get done and get kids back in class and back in the learning environment. So there are things of that nature that we think that we can make better for May when the end of the year happens. Is there other things I'm missing?
The technology and everything worked very well because of what I mentioned earlier. You know, our principals and staff members teaming up as far as looking at what works for their building. One thing we're going to have to be cognizant of, we used Windows XP machines at the middle school and the high school this year. They will not work next year. They've already told us that in their specs, this is the last year will be supported for any of the apps that work for testing. So we need to think about that.
How many of our units were that way, Sean?
We got about 500
Okay. And I know you're going to correct me in technology, and I appreciate you doing that. I call them like mini CPUs.
Mm-hmm.
The technology we talked about that we were going to spend $100,000 on. We haven't done that yet?
No, that was when I approached you with the VDI. That was at the beginning of the year. That's what I was talking about. That's
Thin
a
client?
problem.
Thin client?
Yeah.
What is it called?
It's called VDI. It's virtual desktop.
Virtual.
Yeah.
What's holding us back from that? Us? The board?
We would need finance for that.
Okay, we have that in your budget.
We do not.
We don't have the 100.
We already used, the 100,000 we used for Chromebooks for the fifth grade this year.
Well, beginning July we will be?
Depends on what we put in the budget. So when that's something that, you know, as we prepare the budget, that's something that.
And we were to buy how many of those licenses? 400? The VDI?
We would need at least 400, yes.
And yet we're 500 machines, so we're still 100 short.
It was, the plan that I gave you originally was how to phase in VDI over a 5-year period. So that way, 3-year period, because we were looking at the budget at that point in time. So it was basically how to phase it in pieces, so that way, and we would obviously prioritize where the greatest need would be and gradually phase that in.
Right. Next, again, we have the PI levy that we use to improve the excess cost. That's an area that we can use that excess money to be used for technology.
So $100,000 bought how many VDIs?
I don't have that information in front of me, but
3 years would be 400 in that 3 years.
In the 3-year span, we would be able to replace all of our machines.
All 500 of those
Right.
machines.
We would start using them as thin clients. So then the work would be done on the server end. So
Right.
as there were updates, we would update our servers. The workload would be taken off of the physical machines. The advantage of those licenses would be, for example, with the fact that we have a number of devices in the district now, like iPads and Chromebooks and things like that. Though any of those labs that are VDI could be signed out and actually used in the classroom on machines like this if there was a need for a Windows environment in those classrooms. So now you no longer have to worry about what machine you've got in the classroom. You can actually access those elsewhere as well. So.
And that would kind of like be like sort of logging in?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The idea behind that would be to control our costs in our computer labs.
Right.
Because we have not had a replacement budget in place. And when you start looking at a number of replacing 500 physical machines, and that time it starts to get very costly. We would still have to replace physical machines, but as Mr. Nard mentioned, we would start replacing them with thin clients down the road. The current computers that we have would become thin clients because they're still working. They would not have to be using their processors for the power, though. All they would have to do is connect to the servers. It would do all the majority of the work. We could then go to low-cost thin clients as those fail, which now we're at about $250 to $300 replacement cost per machine. It puts us in a much more controlled replacement cost, so we're not expending tons of money on large desktop machines every single time. The overhead cost. And there's also a benefit from an infrastructure standpoint. From a central location, we can actually control what those machines look like when students log in from a central location. So we can keep a fresh, stable environment every time.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, as I was sort of looking at this, and I talked to Sean, you know, we require in our math classes, those Texas Instrument calculators, they're about $125, $135. Some of these machines are at an educational cost, $250. If we looked at student fees over the course of 4 years, we could be sending our kids with those to college. Now, at that point, I mean, you know, 4 years, they're probably need a new one anyway. However, they would end up with something they could use on their way.
We would not be using the thin clients.
But we wouldn't have to, correct?
Right, exactly.
We could be using the thin clients for our middle school, you know what I'm saying? And so from that standpoint, and I understand other districts are doing this already, we have rolled this out. We could sort of look at a model at what they did really well and what they didn't do well, because and then how we finance that or how that might look. But I think there could be some huge advantages to that.
You have a better idea on finance with the replacement budget. I think we talked about that when there wasn't one. And I instruct one. They phase in as they go. And then it gives you an idea of how much money. Then you decide what you want to do with it.
I mean, if you're talking about XP, some of those are, what, 10 years old?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a lot, that's an operating system, wow. Okay, thank you.
All right.
Nancy, thank you. That was-
Thanks. Thank you.
And I don't know if you scaled that down, but I pretty much understood all of that.
No, I didn't know.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Yeah, I just thought that was we talked a little about that.
Let's take a mic.
We will.
We like you.
Do I have a motion for superintendent's recommendations? Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Nutter?
Just two items. We need to get a resolution for OSC for recycling bids, and then there's been a need for a substitute position in the maintenance sub-custodian area. That's the rate he's proposing.
Okay.
That's it.
Any discussion?
Recycling is a cost, right? Is that a revenue or a cost?
It's going to be a cost.
I
It's
figured.
gonna be a cost, yeah. We would like to, maybe the recycling will offset some of the cost.
Right.
Oh, the high school council, that's a state bid anyway. We'll get the lowest.
I just didn't know.
Yeah. I would like to tell you it offset, actually. Still here as a garbage.
All right, Karen, roll call, please.
Mr. Dorsey?
Yes.
Mrs. Jatordi? Yes. Mr. Douglas?
Yes.
Mr. Kwiatkowski?
Yes.
Dr. Fox?
Yes.
Okay, treasurer's report?
Okay, never get to talk about what he's supposed to do. All right. I want to talk about, we've had a lot of things in the paper about the proposed state funding. I sent you an email out a couple weeks ago talking about the state funding, how we would be impacted, so I wanted to go ahead and go through that with you and answer any questions that I can answer. Now again, this is proposed state funding. It is in discussions, they're in committee, so this tends to change over a period of time, but this went out in the paper, so I wanted to make sure everybody was working on that. How state funding works now, and we look at 2014, we get what we call an opportunity grant. This is kind of our base year, that's why you see that $5,800 number. And we get that times our ADM, okay, so our average daily member. And then we multiply that times what we call our state share index. And that state share index is going to have a new name next year. Is 5%. So we don't get 90% of it, we get 5% of this number. So out of that, $3 million, we get $554,000. Now, other districts, depending on wealth and your property values, that state index goes up or down. 5% is what we are because we're considered a wealthy district from a property standpoint. Then on top of that, we have what we call some add-ons, and this is our K-3 literacy. We get a little bit of money for that, for our teaching and what we're doing with our state work. That's why we're seeing additional. The budget's decided that we want to raise refi K-3. That's why we're testing it. They're going to give us additional funds for that. So we have for every little K-3 student that we have, we get $175, and we get that's multiplied by the state index, and then we get another $150 times the number of students that we have in K-3. So we get another $50,000 there. Economic disadvantage funding, we get a little bit of money there. We don't have any of those students identified in our district. Limited English proficiency, we only have 3 students, so we get a little bit of funding there. We did get some federal funding last year. We did not have any this year. Gifted education, we get a per student amount, and then it pays for a partial intervention specialist plus a gifted coordinator. So we get about $95,000 for that program that we have in place based on the students that are identified as gifted. So you're starting to see the importance of EMIS right here. It is everything, who's identified in K-3, who's, economically disadvantaged, who's in the gifted education program. Then we have transportation funding for all of our students outside of, in our district. And we get an additional special ed funding that I didn't include in here because it's not part of our core financial aid. Then we have a special ed funding that we get additional depending on where they are in the preschool or where they are in the district, and based on the categories of the significance of their disability. So a level 1 will get a smaller percentage than a level 6. So the level 6 typically in your autism, so a student's going to cost more to educate. Now we also have excess costs for those students as well that we get funding for, but this is not part of our state's final core funding.
That can't be that. I mean, there's obviously more money being spent on special ed than on gifted.
Yeah, but we don't get a lot of it.
But you don't get the money.
You get 5%. You get multiply that times that state index, and we get a percentage of it.
So
now we will file.
How does the state value the special ed?
They have a rate per student that they've accumulated the cost over years of how much we assume it takes to educate a special ed student in these different categories. Like speech and language is one. So how much it costs to add speech and language to their curriculum, and autism being 6. So you can see the spectrum of those things. Now we also file for excess cost, and we are in the process of accumulating those costs. So let's say that we have a student that goes outside the district that we fund, that they went to Monarch or something like that. Then we would apply for excess cost, and that's thrown into a pool that the state has, and we get 20 cents on the dollar or something. Whatever money they put aside, they split it out amongst the districts. So that funding will be in excess of this core funding. So this is just what we call that state standard foundation guarantee, what we're talking about. And then career technical education, this is for our vocational programs. We get very little money. Even though we have a number of students, it's just not a lot of funding available for that. So those are little add-ons that we add to our opportunity grant. So that comes out what we call our total foundation funding before the guarantee. Now, when we all shifted this 3 years ago, when they changed school funding, they didn't want to penalize districts like us. So they said, okay, we're going to give you some what we call transitional aid. So whatever your funding, whatever you are getting in 2013, you're going to get for 2014 and 2015. And that's what that transitional aid guarantee is. So you'll see the bridge report that came out in 2013, we were getting $3.4 million. If we were to just look at the foundation formula, we would have only received $1.5 million. So they gave us this transitional aid of $1.8 million so that we would get up to our total state funding this year, $3.4 million. And so that is what we have this year, based on years. And that was really for 2014 and 2015. So we kind of stayed the same based on, because they were trying to say, we're going to transition to a new funding mechanism, and we don't want to penalize you during that period of time. They have given up that thought. So now they have some proposed changes that will impact us. The core opportunity aid will actually increase $5,800 this year's work pay per pupil. So if you took an open enrollment student, for example, $5,800, that will increase to $5,900 in 16 and $6,000 in 17. That's proposed. All of these are proposed changes. They're, you know, they may go and stay the same. Special ed weighted amounts increase about 2%, and that's all those components, all those add-on components. Career technical will increase about 4%. K through 3 literacy funding will increase about 5%. Any other targeted assistance appears unchanged. So transportation, we have a minimum state share is about 60% of our transportation costs. Will go down. It's going down to 50%. So we'll lose some transportation funds as well. So we'll see that drop, and that's where we're seeing some of our drop as well.
Karen, is that transportation aid for all kids or
Yes.
just kids? Okay, so district kids plus kids we're transporting.
That comes out in the excess cost. If we're transporting for special ed, we apply for additional funding for that amount.
What about transporting for like
St. Anselm's?
St. Anselm's?
Part of our,
Thank you.
part of our, that's all part of our funding. We're responsible for that type of funding. An additional change that will be made in the proposal is the state share percentage, which was really called the state share index before. Now it's a state share index percentage. It's modified because before there were two components. There was, you know, how wealthy your property values were and the ability to levy taxes, property taxes, and then there was a wealth, you know, kind of an income index, and that added those two together. And there were some algorithms that, you know, they hide, and you add those together to get to a wealth index, and that's at 0.5%, you know, or that 5% that we are at, because we're a wealthy district in your eyes. What they're going to do now is the income factor is going to be used in a much, it was a very little component, now it's going to be much more influential. So if you have a wealthy district, from an income standpoint, that's going to hurt you. That's going to hurt you a little bit more than if you did not. And we used to use it over, we used the SSI over the same amount for 2 years for 2014 and 2015. Now they're going to recompute it annually, so it could change and fluctuate. Now, what that does is you're dealing with a lot of data now. It's going to change up and down a little bit. So that gives us a little bit of concern as well. The transitional aid, or that guarantee that we talked about, that $1.8 million, is going to be reduced now by up to 1% of the district's total funding. So that includes not only the state funding, but the local taxes as well. So instead of it just being 1% on the $3 million, it's 1% on our $223 million. So that's where we're seeing our drop, is at 1%. And that'll be in fiscal year 16, fiscal year 17, and then it will go on, because they want to phase this out. They want everyone to be on the formula, so that what they're assuming is that our revenue per student is higher than what they deem necessary to educate a child. So that's how they're equalizing. That's why you're seeing the Clevelands and the urban districts get more money, and then their wealthy suburban districts being reduced. The inner circle suburban districts are getting increases as well, but we're seeing that wealthy suburban districts are losing their funding, and that's why, that's part of that, because of the, really the cost per student, or the revenue per student. One other change that's going to affect that gives pause, and this is coming from testimony of a number of people, is the 3-year average. Right now, we have a 3-year average is based on 3 years ago. So, 10, 11, and 12, it came up, and that was our average. They're going to skip 2000, you're going to skip like 15, and now they're going to use 13, 14, 15, where 15 is going to be estimated. So they're going to estimate what they think your property valuations will be in 16 or whatever it's going to be in 17. So you've got 2 that are actual historic numbers and 1 that is an estimate. And that's, of course, causing some people, you're going to assume what's going to happen when it hasn't happened yet. So that's giving some people some pause. It'll give us some fluctuations, or estimates that we're just not comfortable with. So these are proposed changes that will impact the formula. Now, what does this mean in dollars and cents? These are all kind of nice to talk about, and they will change. Those numbers, so percentages will change. What we're seeing is, for 2016, we're seeing a reduction in our final core aid. So going, 236,000. This is 1% of what of a reduction of our total state and local funding. And in 2017, we'll see a 233,000 drop in aid. If we look at that cumulative over a 2-year period, we'll see a $706,000 drop. Now that's because we won't get, in 2017, we're not going to get the 236,000 they took away from us. It's going to, so in 2017, we're going to compare that, we lose almost $500,000 from where we are today. So that's why you're seeing that cumulative.
So why are you losing 700 if I only rate up there 469,000?
That 236 that we had in 2016, you're not going to get that in 2017. You'll see it double. So if we look at what does this mean for us, we started out with $3.4 million. We'll go down to 3.1, and then in 2017 we'll go down to $2.9 million. And again, estimates based on the proposal. These were proposals. We got the estimates from OSBA that they did some calculations for all the districts and all the over the state, and they estimated what those would mean to us based on the new formula. Now, the formula's kind of staying the same. They're just tweaking. They're tweaking the formula, but it's still basically the same as what they've had in the K-6 plan in 13 and 14. What does that mean when we look at our 5-year forecast we put in place? Now, we'll modify the 5-year forecast. We're doing that now. We're starting to look at the 5-year forecast. Per the forecast, for next year, we had $3.2 million in the budget. And per the proposal, it's going to be 3.1. So we're going to be down $87,000. So we're close. Not knowing we had anticipated a 10% reduction in the guarantee, but they took 1% of state and local. They did a little shift. In 2017, our forecast said we knew we were going to go down, so $3 million, and we estimated 2.9, so we'll be down 153. So we're going to have to modify that in our 5-year forecast. And doing that now as we're looking at other things, further along. We did one in October. We're now looking at the new one. So we're not horrible from a standpoint of budgeting, but it is impacting what we're going to see going forward.
No, and obviously I don't want to jump too far ahead, but from what you forecasted, there are other things in the forecast that have changed.
That's exactly
the insurance and all of that.
The insurance has changed. We have staffing changes. We have this revenue changes. We have some capital need changes that we didn't have, the replacement budget. We're going to put it in the general fund, or we're going to put it in the PI fund, those kind of things. The things that Mr. Russo brought up with the transportation, where are we going to take some of the buses out? We're going to use all that for PI, but those were some changes. Nancy's looking at textbooks. We had anticipated some textbooks adoptions this year that we're not going to make, but we're going to make math textbook adoptions next year, which is a significant investment for us. So those kind of things we're working through now. We'll start the budget process, but I'll look at that forecast and see where we're going. We just get better information as we go along. And we've made some changes that have impacted us financially. Where do we go from here? Where is it now? It's still proposed legislation. We do not know what is going to happen. We had some hearings in the House Subcommittee on Primary and Secondary Education on March 5th. Testimony from OASBO, OSBA, and BASA. They all went and did their testimony. Dr. Howard Fleeter, I can send you his testimony. He used to do with the ETPI, and now they have a new name. But he talked about all the impacts and what would happen, what these meant to the funding formula. So he did a nice testimony. You can get that online. And then we have additional testimony available on the 18th, 19th, 20th, and 25th. So they're looking at other people that will be up in front of this subcommittee. And then that, of course, will be rolled into, because this is all part of the biennium budget. What can we do to impact the budget? You're hearing, boards are talking about, talking to, writing proclamations about, how this is impacting them. Testimony, we can certainly impact testimony if there's something that we want to go out and talk about, get on the list and talk about testimony. Letters to our lawmakers, we can talk about, send letters to them saying, hey, we don't really appreciate this. This is the impact on our budget, and we need that funding. And then any contacts that we have with lawmakers, it's time to call them and have lunch. It's time to sit there and we would like to have a discussion on how your vote is going to impact our children's education. And so those are things that we can do to impact the budget, just like we've tried to do in the past. But this is, for us, it's not as bad as some of our other districts. We've prepared for this, but as we had, some of our other districts are seeing millions of dollars go out in their budget. Hudson, huge. Chardon, big numbers. Kinston, $1 million. We're seeing some significant impact on our budget. So we are preparing for it. We will look and see how it impacts our budget and what we have to do going forward. But that's kind of the proposal. But I wanted y'all to, if people are talking to you about it, I wanted to make sure that y'all had some kind of a background.
I was just saying to Dan, what part, Dr. Pottigill is part of the Alliance eventually. Does he have any?
He has a testimony. He had testimony coming up. I believe he did his. Did he do this on the 5th? They talked about the Alliance. He either had his on the 5th or he's scheduled for the next round.
And he has a lot of personal contact. He met with Eklund, for instance, over this, and he did mention West Geauga, even though he doesn't represent the site. I think we ought to think about it like the organization, because we need some representation.
No. Last year you were not.
No.
We were not part of the
He's to sit on the committee.
Right. Last year we weren't. A board member opposed it, and so the board didn't pursue it.
It's not a bad, it's not, I used to sit on the northeast part of the board. It's not a bad idea.
Yeah, we've been
Gives
members
us
for years.
representation as well, down the road. Yeah, because Betts and Tony both, we're supposed to speak.
I think
They run the
I'm
line.
not sure that he did his own thing. So, these are just lobbying groups that, are looking out for those interests and can have contacts with our legislature that we may not have access to.
Well, who's our liaison, Dan? We have a liaison with political,
I don't know.
somebody, does anybody know who they are? Or did we not do that? Did we not assign that?
The
We
organization-
assigned an OSBA legislature liaison.
Oh, yeah,
Let's
that's
see.
right, but we didn't do one for
It wasn't.
general.
No.
But I think the OSBA liaison would be a good segue for, they're the ones they're the ones down there on my street doing testimony and helping out.
Well, I'm thinking in terms of contacting Lynch and, making them aware of how this impacts us, because evidently, according to Pottinger, they weren't really aware of this at all, that it impacted districts in there.
It sounds like you volunteered for that job, man.
Well, there are other people who might have better contacts with them, but, I'd certainly be willing to do it. I'd want to legally represent the board in the sense that we have to have consensus on what we're to say, and I don't want to, represented as an individual. If I were to do this, I'd want to represent it as a board, you know, our position as a board. So, you know, we'd have to do that publicly, and we have to do it soon because you're going to see the schedule up here. I would say if we were to have a board position, it would be that these cuts impact us and that we would like our representative to work to continue our district's funding at its current levels. Is that something that the board could back?
I think absolutely. We have a board meeting on Monday, right?
Yeah.
Monday after.
Would give us a chance to come up with an idea of what we want to say as a board.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be good.
Would you add that?
Yeah, I'll do that.
That would be great. Okay. Well, our next board meeting, as we just said, is March 23rd, at 7 p.m. It'll be in this community room. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Kukowski?
Yes.
Dr. Phelps?
Yes.
Mr. Thorson?
Yes.
Mrs. DeVore?
Yes.
Mr. Douglas?
Yes.